It has been 400 years since the first African slaves arrived in what is now the United States. And the debate over reparations for this huge stain on American history is not new, but let's take a closer look at it.
Turning to the 2020 presidential race, some Democratic candidates are being asked about coming forward on whether they favor reparations for slavery on the campaign trail.
Now Georgetown students have voted to pay money to the descendants of those slaves, what is called reparations.
Whatever it costs, it's time to do this.
I have long believed that this country should resolve its original sin of slavery, and that one of the ways we should consider doing that is through reparations. Shouldn't we compensate people if they were property?
A commission to study reparations. Would you sign that bill?
Yes. And he said, foundational to reparations is the word repair. Foundational to repair is the truth. And until all Americans understand that civil rights are not just those victories that I began with at the outset of my comments, but the injustices that have been visited and continue to be visited on people, we will never get the change that we need to live up to the promise of this country. So absolutely, I would sign that into law.
We've all benefited from the sales of these slaves previously, and I think that we have a duty now to show our responsibility in the fact that we did benefit from them.
Our students are contributing to an important national conversation. It has become a national conversation on the presidential campaign trail for some Democrats, including New Jersey Senator Cory Booker.
I support reparations.
Some of the Georgetown students who helped organize the referendum say winning the vote is just the first step.
But I'm not waiting, because there's a lot of folks in my neighborhood who want the scales balanced now. And that's why I've been pushing a lot of legislation. Right now, again, people in my community don't have time to wait.
This is not a debt we can afford to delay any longer. The economic restitution for 2.5 centuries of slavery followed by 100 years of domestic terrorism. It's simply a debt we owe. This country will not heal until we take a serious moral inventory. Racism is a character defect. Let's end this. Let's fix this. Let's solve this. Reparations won't end everything, but it will be a profound gift. It implies a mea culpa. It implies a recognition of a debt owed, and therefore it carries not only economic power, but spiritual force.
Yes, we need reparations.
The conversation about reparations is also one of justice between generations. When something is broken, we ought to fix it.
We have got to recognize that and give people a lift up.
It is a time for us to address the ugly stain of slavery that is a part of our history.
A significant percentage of us are concerned about the issue of reparations. The black community is not monolithic. We don't all agree on this issue and how to proceed about it. But the one thing that's true is that you can't just talk about it without giving some understanding of what it means when you say reparations. If you're talking about some sort of race-neutral policy that's going to lift all boats, that's not what most black people I talk to consider reparations. They're talking about race-specific policies that actually deal with issues that affect African Americans, in particular that deal with the legacy of slavery and segregation.
I mean, for people to act like reparations is such a far-fetched thing is crazy. Because if you were working for a company and you worked for that company for free for a long period of time, you would probably want back pay.
But I think it signals something more important. In an era in which the President of the United States does not pay his debts, in which we are appalled that people will bribe third parties to get their children into elite institutions, I think what the students are imagining is an opportunity to actually make amends and to account for the fact that we are all benefiting from the work of other people who weren't properly compensated or restored. I think that the young people today are observing some real critical questions that have been unresolved through history. And so I think our students are seeing themselves as taking responsibility, something that we always try to instill in them in the classroom, and using their education in service of others who were denied the opportunities they had because of their color, because of their family origin, and because of the deep roots of white supremacy in our nation.
Because it's not just about equality at this point. I think what reparations really get at is equity. And equity is something that's quite distinct from equality, because what equity tries to do is make up for the historical gap. And I think that the conversation around reparations draws that to our attention, that we're really not talking about giving somebody something. We're not talking about handouts. What we're talking about atoning for, in a material way, a history that contributed to the persistence of Black inequality that's just structured throughout society. And the legacies of slavery definitely have a direct tie to some of these contemporary manifestations of poverty in African American communities and in the Black diaspora more broadly speaking.
So Trevor Noah, on a recent edition of The Daily Show, got into a conversation.
Reparations is a specific conversation about a specific time in America, and that is Black people were slaves. You know what I mean? I've even heard people say like, oh, but there were some of the Irish who were indentured. Like, yeah, slavery. Look at the numbers, look at the time, look at the level of work.
Right. And the distinctions he was making is it's not compensation for something lost. It's sort of a bigger issue than that has resulted in today's wealth inequality.
Well, absolutely, and that reparations are financial investments that are directly tied to the institution of slavery and its legacies. And unfortunately, a lot of our politics, a lot of our political conversation tries to push towards race neutrality, for example, in colorblindness, when we know from the evidence and from the history that still matters.
There was some reference to reparations. I have introduced H.R. 40, which I take very seriously.
He argued that reparations would drive a, quote, national reckoning, which would lead to a spiritual renewal. Reparations have also come up on the presidential campaign trail. Democratic candidates, Senators Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris, and former HUD Secretary Julian Castro have expressed their support for cash payments. And they and a number of other candidates have said that if elected, they would sign a bill called H.R. 40 into law. It would establish a commission to study how slavery and segregation still affects African Americans and how to fix it.